she screamed as the hot coffee hit her while her ex laughed and filmed every second. The bar went silent. Nobody stepped in, except the one man Charlie never noticed. And by the time he realized who was watching, his life was already over. If this story pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable story dropping tomorrow. And while you're here, jump into the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. Alright, let's get back into it. The scalding liquid burned through her uniform before Joanna Sanders even registered what was happening. The coffee still steaming from the espresso machine splashed across her chest and throat, soaking through the thin cotton and searing the skin beneath. Her scream tore through the upscale night bar like a siren, cutting through the bass-heavy music and drunk laughter in an instant. She stumbled backward, colliding with a table as glasses shattered around her feet, tears already streaming down her face as the fabric clung to her blistering skin. And Charlie Floyd kept laughing. He actually kept laughing as he held his phone higher, adjusting the angle to capture her agony in perfect frame. His patterned designer shirt, silver gray with geometric detailing, that probably cost more than 2 months of her tips combined, caught the neon light streaming from the bar's illuminated shelves. The borrowed watch on his wrist, polished gold and ostentatious, gleamed as he zoomed in on her trembling hands. He was filming her suffering, like it was content for his social media, entertainment packaged for validation from strangers who'd never know her name. "That's what happens when you ignore me, Joanna," he said, his voice loud enough for the entire section to hear. Each word dripped with the kind of entitled cruelty that came from never facing consequences. His slicked-back hair and confident posture radiated the arrogance of someone who'd always gotten away with everything. "Maybe next time you'll remember who you're talking to." Nobody moved. The other waitstaff froze mid-service, trays balanced in motionless hands, eyes locked on the floor because intervention meant unemployment in a city where rent came first and dignity second. The bartender's hand hovered over a bottle he'd been pouring. A server near the kitchen entrance gripped her notepad until her knuckles went white. They all knew Charlie Floyd. They'd all heard the stories. And they all knew that speaking up meant being the next target. The wealthy patrons, dressed in tailored suits and cocktail dresses that cost more than Joanna made in a year, suddenly became fascinated by their drinks, their phones, the abstract art on the exposed brick walls. Anything but the woman kneeling in broken glass and coffee-soaked humiliation. Conversations that had been animated moments ago now dissolved into uncomfortable silence. Ice clinked in glasses. Someone coughed. The DJ, sensing something wrong, let the current track fade without cueing the next. In this neon-lit night bar in the city's entertainment district, Charlie Floyd believed he was invincible. The ex-boyfriend who'd spent years convincing Joanna she was worthless, the man who'd controlled her finances, isolated her from friends, and made her believe leaving would be more dangerous than staying. He'd found her here, in the one place she'd rebuilt herself quietly, and decided to remind her and everyone watching that he still owned her. Joanna's hands shook as she tried to pull the scalding fabric away from her skin. Each movement sent fresh waves of burning pain through her chest. Her white uniform, pristine at the start of her shift, was now stained dark brown, ruined. Just like he'd always promised to ruin everything she tried to build without him. "Get up," Charlie said, still recording. His grin was wide, performative, designed for maximum humiliation. "You're making a scene." She couldn't speak. The pain had stolen her voice, replaced it with gasping breaths that burned her throat. Tears blurred her vision, but she could still see his shoes, expensive Italian leather, probably borrowed like everything else he wore, just inches from where she knelt. What Charlie didn't see was the man in the back corner booth. Lucas Lemons sat motionless in his black suit, jacket unbuttoned, no tie. Tattoos crawled up his neck and across his hands, intricate patterns that told stories most people in this bar would never understand. His dark hair was slicked back, his expression unreadable, his posture relaxed in a way that suggested absolute control rather than casual comfort. He didn't rush forward. He didn't shout. He simply watched with the kind of cold, absolute focus that came from years of deciding who thrived and who disappeared in this city's nightlife economy. The bartender had already noticed him. His eyes flicked toward Lucas, then away quickly, his face going pale. The manager, standing near the host stand, saw him too. She straightened immediately, phone already in her hand, uncertain whether to call someone or wait for Lucas to give a signal. They knew exactly who controlled the protection money that kept their doors open, and their problems solved quietly. Charlie Floyd didn't. Lucas leaned back slightly, one tattooed hand resting on the table, the other adjusting the collar of his shirt with deliberate precision. He noted everything: the borrowed watch that caught the light too eagerly, the phone still recording, the laughter that echoed just a second too long. He observed the way Charlie's friends stood behind him, equally drunk, equally complicit, their phones also raised to document the humiliation. He registered the way the crowd had been trained to look away, the way systems designed to protect had already failed before Joanna even hit the ground. This wasn't just cruelty. This was power misused. This was a lesson someone had failed to teach. Joanna finally managed to stand, supported by a chair she gripped so tightly her knuckles went white. Her breathing came in shallow gasps. The pain hadn't lessened, if anything. It had intensified, spreading across her skin like liquid fire. She wanted to run, to hide, to disappear into the back room and never come out. But she knew Charlie would follow. He always followed. "Pathetic," Charlie muttered, still filming as he turned slightly to address his friends. "This is the woman who thought she was too good for me. Look at her now." The laughter from his group felt like another assault. Joanna closed her eyes, wishing the floor would open beneath her, wishing she'd never taken this job, wishing she'd stayed invisible. Lucas Lemon stood. The movement was subtle, economical, but somehow it registered throughout the bar like a shift in atmospheric pressure. He adjusted his jacket with tattooed hands, buttoned it with careful precision, and walked toward the exit without a single word. His footsteps were measured, unhurried. He didn't look at Charlie. He didn't look at Joanna. He simply moved through the space like someone who owned it, because in every way that mattered, he did. But his eyes never left Charlie's reflection in the mirror behind the bar. And as Lucas pushed through the exit into the neon-lit street, he pulled out his phone and made a single call. "I need everything on someone," he said quietly. Charlie Floyd, everything. Lucas Lemons didn't believe in coincidences. He'd been sitting in that corner booth for 40 minutes before Charlie Floyd walked through the door, and in those 40 minutes, he'd cataloged everything worth knowing about the establishment he technically owned. The bartender was skimming small amounts, nothing egregious, but consistent enough to matter. The manager was sleeping with one of the investors. The security guard at the door was taking side payments to let certain clientele skip the line. These were problems Lucas filed away for later. Minor infractions in an empire built on understanding exactly how power flowed through the city's nightlife. Then Joanna Sanders had appeared, carrying a tray of drinks with the kind of careful precision that spoke to experience and exhaustion in equal measure. Lucas had noticed her immediately, not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because she moved through the space like someone trying to be invisible. That particular kind of careful invisibility interested him. People didn't make themselves small without reason. People didn't avoid eye contact and take the longest routes between tables unless they were hiding from something, or someone. When Charlie Floyd entered 20 minutes later, Lucas saw the shift in her body language before she even turned around. Her shoulders tensed. Her grip on the tray tightened. She'd changed direction mid-step, angling toward the far side of the bar, putting as much distance between herself and the entrance as the room's geometry allowed. There it is, Lucas had thought. That's what she's been hiding from. He'd watched Charlie work the room loud, performative, desperate for attention in a way that screamed insecurity despite the expensive clothes. The watch was wrong. Lucas knew watches the way some men knew cars or wine. That particular Rolex didn't match Charlie's shirt, didn't match his shoes, didn't match anything about him except his need to appear wealthier than he was. Borrowed, then, or stolen. Either way, it told Lucas everything he needed to know about Charlie Floyd's authenticity. The assault itself had unfolded with the kind of casual brutality that Lucas had seen too many times in his line of work. Men like Charlie operated on a simple principle. Power existed to be used against those who couldn't fight back. They chose their victims carefully, women working service jobs who couldn't afford to lose employment, who'd been trained by circumstance to accept humiliation as the cost of survival. Lucas had remained motionless during the attack, every instinct screaming at him to intervene. But years of controlling a criminal empire had taught him that public displays of authority were messy, inefficient, and ultimately counterproductive. The goal wasn't to be seen stopping cruelty. The goal was to ensure cruelty stopped permanently, so he'd memorize details instead. Charlie's face, not just his features, but the micro-expressions that revealed character. The way his smile widened when Joanna screamed. The way he angled his phone to ensure he captured her from the most humiliating perspective. The way he played to his friends, performing cruelty for an audience, because the cruelty itself wasn't enough. It needed witnesses, validation, social proof that his dominance was real. Lucas had also memorized the crowd's response. The frozen staff, the averted eyes, the uncomfortable silence that spoke to complicity and cowardice in equal measure. This was a system failure, and Lucas had built his empire on fixing systems that failed people who deserved better. Now, standing outside the bar in the cool night air, Lucas lit a cigarette and let the nicotine steady his thoughts. The neon signs reflected off the wet pavement, pink, blue, green, creating fractured rainbows in the puddles left by an earlier rain. Traffic hummed in the distance. Somewhere a car alarm wailed, and then fell silent. His phone was already ringing before he finished the first drag. Everything on Charlie Floyd, Lucas repeated to the voice that answered. Employment history, financial records, known associates, criminal background, social media, addresses current and previous. I want to know where he gets his money, who he owes, and what he thinks nobody knows about him. Timeline? The voice asked. Yesterday. Lucas ended the call and took another drag, watching the bar's entrance through the cigarette smoke. The door remained closed. Inside, the music had resumed. The DJ, apparently deciding the crisis had passed. But Lucas knew better. The crisis hadn't passed. It had just begun. His network extended through this city like nerve endings through a body bartenders, bouncers, servers, drivers, dealers, fixers, and enforcers who understood that Lucas Lemons paid better and protected more reliably than any legitimate institution ever could. The police were corrupt or incompetent, depending on the precinct. The courts were backlogged and biased toward wealth. The social services were underfunded and overwhelmed. Lucas filled the gaps, not because he was virtuous, he'd committed enough crimes to fill multiple lifetimes, but because systems required maintenance. The nightlife economy he controlled functioned on a simple principle. Everyone paid protection, and in exchange, everyone received protection. Bar owners paid for security. Workers paid reduced rates for the same. And anyone who violated the arrangement faced consequences that were swift, certain, and proportional. Charlie Floyd had just violated the arrangement in the most public way possible. Lucas finished his cigarette and crushed it beneath his shoe. Italian leather, custom-made, perfectly maintained. He believed in quality, he believed in precision, and most importantly, he believed in consequences that educated rather than simply punished. Men like Charlie Floyd weren't born cruel. They were taught that cruelty worked, that violence and humiliation were tools for maintaining dominance, that women like Joanna Sanders existed to absorb their insecurities and validate their fragile sense of power. Someone had failed to correct that education. Someone had let Charlie Floyd believe he was untouchable. Lucas intended to provide remedial lessons. His phone buzzed. A text from the bartender inside. She refused the ambulance, says she can't afford it. Manager offering her cab fare home. Lucas typed back. Give her a week paid leave. Medical bills covered. Don't tell her where the money came from. Another buzz, this time from his researcher. Preliminary results in 30 minutes. This guy's interesting. Interesting how? Lucas typed. Lot of smoke, waiting to find the fire. Lucas pocketed his phone and looked up at the bar's facade, all glass and steel and neon promises. Inside, Joanna Sanders was probably sitting in the break room, pressing ice against burns that would scar physically and emotionally. Inside, Charlie Floyd was probably still laughing, still showing the video to anyone who'd watch, still convinced tonight had been consequence-free. Lucas Lemon smiled without warmth. He'd been called many things in his 42 years, criminal, enforcer, boss, monster, but tonight, he'd be something simpler. Tonight, he'd be the consequence Charlie Floyd never saw coming. 3 years ago, Joanna Sanders had believed love was supposed to hurt a little. That's what Charlie had told her during their first argument, when she'd questioned why he needed her bank password. If you loved me, you'd trust me with this. If you loved me, you wouldn't make it so difficult. And she'd given it to him because the alternative, being called paranoid, suspicious, damaged, felt worse than the small violation of privacy. That was how it started. Not with violence. Not even with obvious control. Just tiny surrenders that seemed reasonable in the moment, that accumulated like interest on a debt she didn't know she was taking on. Now, sitting in the bar's cramped break room with a bag of ice pressed against her chest, Joanna could trace the entire trajectory of her relationship with Charlie Floyd like a map of her own diminishing self. Each landmark represented another piece of herself she'd traded for temporary peace. The fights about her friends. They don't understand us. They're trying to turn you against me. Until one by one, her friends stopped calling because she'd canceled plans too many times, made too many excuses, chosen Charlie's comfort over their concern. The criticism disguised as care. I'm just trying to help you be better. Is that so wrong? Her clothes were too revealing or too frumpy. Her laugh was too loud. Her ambitions were unrealistic. Her family was toxic, never mind that his behavior toward them had made family dinners unbearable until she'd stopped attending altogether. The financial control that arrived like fog, gradually obscuring everything until she couldn't see her own resources anymore. He'd convinced her to add his name to her lease, then to her credit cards just for emergencies. Then he'd needed to borrow money that was never repaid. Then she'd found herself paying for his lifestyle while her own savings evaporated. Because what kind of girlfriend wouldn't support her partner when he was between jobs? Between jobs. That phrase had stretched across 18 months. The isolation had been so complete that by the time Joanna recognized it as abuse, she had no one left to tell. No friends to call. No family she hadn't alienated. No savings to fund an escape. She'd been trapped in a studio apartment with a man who tracked her phone, monitored her emails, and convinced her that leaving would be more dangerous than staying. "I'll kill myself if you go," he'd said during her first attempt to end things. "And everyone will know it's your fault." The second attempt, "I'll tell everyone what you're really like. I have screenshots. I have recordings. I'll ruin you." The third attempt, "You think you can just walk away? You think anyone else would want someone as broken as you?" She'd believed him. That was the part Joanna hated most when she looked back, how completely she'd internalized his version of reality, how she'd started to see herself through his eyes, worthless, damaged. Lucky that anyone tolerated her at all. The breaking point had come on a Tuesday. Nothing dramatic. No spectacular violence, just Charlie scrolling through her phone during breakfast, reading her text messages aloud in a mocking voice while she'd sat across from him, numb, eating toast she couldn't taste. And something inside her, some small, stubborn ember of self-preservation, had finally caught flame. She'd left while he was at the gym, packed one suitcase, abandoned the lease and the debt, and everything she couldn't carry. A women's shelter had taken her in for 3 weeks. A social worker had helped her file a restraining order that Charlie had violated twice before the police stopped responding to her calls. A friend from high school, one of the few who'd never given up on her entirely, had offered her a couch and helped her find the job at the bar. 6 months of rebuilding. 6 months of therapy appointments she could barely afford. 6 months of jumping at sudden noises and checking over her shoulder and trying to remember what it felt like to exist without fear. And then tonight, Charlie had found her. The break room door opened. The manager, a woman named Rita, with kind eyes and worry lines, entered carrying a first aid kit. "Paramedics are still outside if you've changed your mind." "I can't afford the ambulance," Joanna said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, hollow, distant, like someone else was speaking through her body. "The bill's covered," Rita said, kneeling beside her chair. "Don't worry about the money." Joanna looked up sharply. "By who?" Rita's expression flickered with something Joanna couldn't read. "Management. We take care of our people." That was a lie. Joanna knew it was a lie because she'd worked here long enough to know that management didn't cover anything they weren't legally required to cover. But she was too tired to argue, too burned, literally and figuratively, to push back. Rita began examining the injury, her touch gentle but professional. "This needs proper medical attention, Joanna. 2nd-degree burns at minimum. You could get an infection. I'll go to urgent care tomorrow. You need to go now. I need to finish my shift. Your shift is over." Rita's voice carried an edge of authority Joanna had never heard before. "Paid leave. 1 week. Non-negotiable." Joanna felt tears building behind her eyes, not from pain this time, but from the unexpected kindness, the sudden reprieve from the constant calculation of whether she could afford to be hurt. "I can't take a week off. I need the money." "You'll be paid." Rita stood, wiping her hands on her slacks. "Listen to me, Joanna. What happened tonight wasn't okay. It wasn't your fault. And you don't have to pretend you're fine." The tears came then, hot and shameful. Joanna pressed the ice harder against her chest, as if physical pain could distract from the emotional unraveling. "He found me," she whispered. "After 6 months, he found me." Rita sat down in the chair across from her, suddenly looking much older than her 40-some years. Is there somewhere safe you can stay? I don't know. The truth felt like admitting defeat. I thought I was safe here. The police won't do anything. Joanna cut her off with the certainty of experience. They didn't last time. They won't now. Charlie will tell them it was an accident. He'll say I provoked him. He'll charm his way out of it like he always does. Rita's jaw tightened. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it, seeming to reconsider whatever she'd been about to say. Instead, she reached across and squeezed Joanna's uninjured hand. Take the weak. Heal. Let me worry about the rest. But Joanna knew the rest wasn't something anyone could fix. Charlie Floyd had humiliated her in front of dozens of witnesses and walked away laughing. That video was probably already online, shared among his friends, proof that he could still reach her, still hurt her, still reduce her to nothing whenever he pleased. She'd spent 6 months believing she'd escaped. Tonight proved she'd only been hiding. And Charlie had just reminded everyone, especially Joanna, that he always found what belonged to him. Charlie Floyd posted the video at 11:47 p.m., still riding the high of public humiliation well executed. The caption was simple, calculated for maximum engagement. When your ex doesn't know her place, #boss moves. He watched the metrics climb from the back of his friend's Mercedes borrowed, like most things in Charlie's life, though he'd never admit that detail. Views ticked upward, likes accumulated. Comments flooded in, a mix of laughing emojis and congratulatory messages from people who mistook cruelty for charisma. Bro, you're viral, said Derek, driving with one hand while checking his own phone with the other. Derek's family owned a chain of car dealerships, which made him useful for vehicles and validation in roughly equal measure. This is hitting like 15,000 views already. Charlie grinned, refreshing the screen. Told you, people love authenticity. Authenticity. That's what Charlie called it when he performed dominance for an audience. The word tasted like power in his mouth, sharp, intoxicating, validating every insecurity he pretended not to have. Should have seen her face, added Kyle from the passenger seat, replaying his own video of the incident. Kyle's father was a real estate attorney, which made him useful for legal advice Charlie never intended to follow. Like, completely broken. Peak content. They laughed together, 3 men in their late 20s dressed in borrowed confidence, driving through a city that would eventually stop letting them pretend they mattered. But tonight, fueled by expensive whiskey and the algorithm's approval, they felt invincible. Charlie's phone buzzed with a text from his dealer. You're 2 weeks late on payment. Need that handled. He dismissed the notification without responding. The debt was manageable, just $3,000, barely worth worrying about. Except Charlie owed money to 7 different people, and manageable debts had a way of becoming unmanageable when they accumulated interest and impatience in equal measure. His Rolex, the gold one that caught light so perfectly in videos, belonged to his cousin, who'd loaned it for a job interview 3 months ago and stopped returning Charlie's calls after the 2nd week. His apartment was technically his mother's investment property, and she'd started asking questions about rent he'd promised to pay but never did. His patterned designer shirt had been a gift from an ex-girlfriend he'd convinced to put her credit card down at a boutique before he'd ghosted her. Charlie Floyd's entire life was a performance built on other people's resources, and he'd become exceptionally skilled at finding new sources before the old ones ran dry. Women were easiest. They wanted to believe his promises, wanted to invest in his potential, wanted to be the one who fixed him. He'd cycle through them systematically, 6 months of romance, 6 months of extraction, then discard and repeat. Joanna had lasted longer than most because she'd been easier to control, more willing to shoulder his failures, more isolated from anyone who might warn her what he really was. Leaving him had been the first autonomous decision she'd made in 2 years. Charlie had taken it personally. You think she'll press charges? Derek asked, turning onto the highway. Charlie snorted. With what evidence? It was an accident. Coffee slipped. Dozens of witnesses saw me trying to apologize while she made a scene. That's what he'd tell the police if they bothered to investigate, which they wouldn't. Charlie had learned early that authority responded to confidence and class signaling more than facts. Show up in the right clothes, speak with the right accent, project the right amount of wounded innocence. And suddenly assault became misunderstanding. His phone buzzed again. This time, a message from someone he didn't recognize. Saw your video. We should talk business. Charlie opened the message thread. No profile picture, no additional context, just that single line. What kind of business? He typed back. 3 dots appeared. then disappeared, then appeared again. The kind that needs men who understand leverage. DM me. Charlie showed the message to Kyle. See? Opportunities. This is what happens when you're not afraid to dominate. But even as he said it, something cold flickered in his stomach. A sensation he didn't have words for, that felt almost like being watched. He dismissed it as paranoia, the cocaine wearing off. Nothing that mattered. At 12:15 a.m., Charlie's Instagram account gained 40 new followers. At 12:23, he received a friend request on Facebook from someone whose profile showed luxury cars and nightlife photos. At 12:31, an email arrived in his spam folder with the subject line, "Investment Opportunity High Returns." Charlie barely registered any of it. He was too busy responding to comments, building his narrative, converting Joanna's pain into social capital that might translate to actual capital if he played it correctly. What Charlie couldn't know was that each of those accounts belonged to the same network. Each was a tendril of an organization far larger and more patient than anything in his comprehension. Each was documenting him, mapping his connections, building a profile that would eventually become evidence. At 12:47 a.m., exactly 1 hour after posting the video, Charlie's bank account balance dropped by $200, an automatic payment he'd forgotten about. Overdraft fees triggered. His card declined at the drive-thru where Derek had stopped for drunk food. "Card's not working," Charlie said, forcing casualness into his voice. "Use yours. I'll Venmo you." He wouldn't Venmo him. Derek knew he wouldn't. But Derek paid anyway because that's what people did for Charlie. They covered his debts and pretended not to notice the pattern. Because acknowledging the pattern meant acknowledging they'd been used. At 1:15 a.m., Charlie stumbled into his mother's apartment, still scrolling through comments on his video. The view count had plateaued at 18,000. Good, but not great. Viral adjacent, not actually viral. Disappointing, when he'd expected more. He fell asleep with his phone still in his hand, refreshing metrics that had stopped climbing, chasing validation that never quite satisfied. He didn't notice the black sedan that had been parked across the street for the past 40 minutes. He didn't see the man inside, tattooed hands resting on the steering wheel, watching his silhouette move across the apartment windows. He didn't know that Lucas Lemons had already received Charlie's full financial history. Criminal record surprisingly clean. Suspiciously so, and a list of every woman who'd filed restraining orders that mysteriously disappeared from court records. Charlie Floyd fell asleep, believing tonight had been consequence-free. By morning, he'd learn how catastrophically wrong he was. Lucas Lemons read financial records the way other men read novels, finding narrative in the numbers, character in the contradictions. Charlie Floyd's bank statements told a story of systematic extraction, deposits from women's accounts, always in round numbers, withdrawals that coincided with luxury purchases he couldn't afford, recurring payments to a debt consolidation service that suggested someone was barely keeping the entire structure from collapsing, credit cards maxed out, then mysteriously paid down, then maxed out again in a pattern that spoke to borrowed money and broken promises. It was 3:17 a.m., and Lucas sat in his office above a legitimate import business that served as the operational face of his considerably less legitimate empire. The room was sparse black leather furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city's financial district, a single desk lamp creating a pool of light in otherwise complete darkness. He preferred working at night when the city's rhythm matched his own, when the honest people were sleeping and only those with secrets remained awake. His researcher, a woman named Iris who'd worked for the FBI before discovering that private sector paid better and asked fewer moral questions, had delivered 3 separate dossiers within 6 hours. Each one had peeled back another layer of Charlie Floyd's carefully constructed facade. "The Rolex is his cousin's," Iris had explained during her 2 a.m. briefing, her laptop screen illuminating her face in the dark office. "The car he drives belongs to Derek Hartman, friend from college. Family money. Probably doesn't know Charlie's using him as a mobile bank. The apartment is his mother's property. She's been trying to evict him for 4 months, but he's exploiting tenant protection laws." Lucas had nodded, absorbing information without comment. Employment history? Spotty. Fired from 3 sales jobs for misrepresenting products. 2 sexual harassment complaints that got settled quietly. Currently claims to be a social media consultant. But there's no registered business, no tax filings, no legitimate income. So how does he eat? Iris had smiled without warmth. Women, mostly. We found 7 in the past 3 years who filed police reports or restraining orders. Only 2 of those orders actually got processed. The other 5 disappeared from court records before hearings. That detail had made Lucas lean forward. Someone's cleaning up after him. More than someone. Look at this. Iris had pulled up a different file. This one showing a web of connections that looked less like a social network and more like a criminal organization chart. Charlie's connected to the Fitzgerald crew, low-level organized crime, mostly protection rackets and illegal gambling. His cousin works for them. His friend Kyle's father has represented them in court. Charlie's been running debt collection for them, targeting women in service industry jobs. Lucas had felt something cold settle in his chest. Explain. They loan money at predatory rates to bartenders, servers, dancers, anyone working nightlife jobs who's desperate enough to take it. When payments lapse, they send Charlie. He's got a type. Young women, usually immigrants or without family support, always vulnerable. He romances them, gets access to their accounts, extracts what's owed plus interest. If they resist, he threatens them. If they still resist. Iris had gestured to the screen showing police reports. He escalates. Joanna Sanders? Perfect victim profile. Isolated, broke, already traumatized from their previous relationship. He probably thought he could walk back into her life and pick up where he left off. When she refused to engage, he made an example of her publicly. Lucas had dismissed Iris at 2:30 a.m., with instructions to dig deeper into the Fitzgerald connection. Now, alone in his office, with dawn approaching, he studied the infrastructure that had allowed Charlie Floyd to operate with impunity. The bar where the assault occurred, Meridian paid protection money to Lucas's organization. That meant Lucas had failed. His entire empire functioned on a simple principle. People paid for safety, and in exchange, Lucas ensured their safety. Joanna Sanders had worked in his territory, under his protection, and Lucas had allowed predators to hunt there. That was unacceptable. He pulled up the bar's financial records, next ones they hadn't voluntarily provided. Ones Iris had extracted through methods that would never be admissible in court, but told truths that court records often missed. Meridian had been laundering money for the past 18 months. Small amounts, carefully disguised, but consistent. The pattern matched known Fitzgerald operations. Lucas's jaw tightened. The Fitzgeralds were minor players, too small to be worth his direct attention, too connected to be ignored entirely. They operated in the gaps of his territory, parasites feeding on the edges of his empire. He tolerated them because they'd been careful, because intervention would have been messy, because sometimes the cost of correction exceeded the cost of tolerance. That calculation had just changed. He picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory. It rang twice before a gravelly voice answered, thick with sleep and cigarettes. "It's 4 a.m, Lucas. I need surveillance on the Fitzgerald operations. Every location, every associate, every transaction. What's the timeline?" "Now. And I need to know which cops are on their payroll." A pause. "This is about that video, isn't it? The waitress?" Word traveled fast in Lucas's world. He'd expected nothing less. Among other things, the Fitzgeralds aren't going to like you poking around their business. I don't need them to like it. Lucas's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. I need them to understand that certain behaviors don't happen in my city. Charlie Floyd collected debt for them by terrorizing a woman working under my protection. That makes it my business. You're going to war over a waitress? Lucas leaned back in his chair, watching the city's lights begin to fade as dawn approached. I'm correcting a system failure. Charlie Floyd is a symptom. The Fitzgeralds enabled him. The police protected him. The courts buried evidence for him. That's not one bad actor, that's infrastructure designed to let powerful men hurt vulnerable women without consequences. And you're going to fix that? No, Lucas said quietly. I'm going to dismantle it piece by piece until everyone involved understands that power comes with responsibility. The Fitzgeralds forgot that. So did Charlie Floyd. So did every cop who made a police report disappear. He ended the call and stood, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the financial district. Somewhere out there, Joanna Sanders was probably awake too, staring at burns that would scar, replaying humiliation that would haunt her, believing as she'd been taught to believe that powerful men always won and victims always lost. Lucas intended to teach her differently. Not through rescue. Joanna Sanders didn't need saving. She needed the playing field leveled. She needed the systems that failed her to be held accountable. She needed to see that cruelty had costs, even when it wore expensive clothes and smiled for cameras. Charlie Floyd had poured coffee on the wrong woman in the wrong bar, and Lucas Lemons had spent 15 years building an empire specifically to correct exactly this kind of imbalance. The sun was rising now, painting the city in shades of gold and amber. Lucas watched it with the patience of someone who understood that justice, real justice, didn't announce itself loudly. It simply arrived, inevitable as dawn, for those who'd forgotten to fear consequences. Detective Raymond Pierce arrived at the police station Thursday morning with coffee that had gone cold during his commute, and a stack of case files he'd been avoiding for 3 weeks. He was 52, 28 years on the force, and deeply tired of pretending the system worked the way civilians believed it did. The assault report on his desk had been filed at 2:34 a.m. by a patrol officer named Chen Young, idealistic, still believed paperwork mattered. Pierce skimmed the details. Victim Joanna Sanders, assailant Charlie Floyd, multiple witnesses, video evidence on the perpetrator's own phone, open and shut, except nothing was ever open and shut when money and connections were involved. Pierce recognized Charlie Floyd's name before he reached the second paragraph. He'd seen it in 3 previous reports, each one mysteriously reclassified or withdrawn before reaching a prosecutor. The pattern was familiar. Someone with juice was running interference. Pierce had learned long ago not to ask who or why. Asking questions endangered pensions, and he had 6 years until retirement. He marked the file for follow-up and moved to the next case. At 9:15 a.m., his desk phone rang. Detective Pierce. He answered without looking up from his computer screen. "Raymond, it's Marcus Fitzgerald." The voice was smooth, confident, familiar in a way that made Pierce's stomach tighten. "Got a minute?" Pierce glanced around the bullpen. 3 other detectives working their own cases, none paying attention. He lowered his voice anyway. "I'm at work, Marcus. I know where you are. That's why I'm calling. You caught a case last night, assault at Meridian, Charlie Floyd." Pierce said nothing, which was its own answer. "Charlie's a good kid," Marcus continued, the way men like him always did when they meant the opposite. "Stupid sometimes, sure. Had too much to drink. Things got out of hand. But this doesn't need to be a whole thing, you understand? There's video evidence," Pierce said carefully. "Multiple witnesses. The victim has second-degree burns. Accidents happen. Coffee spilled. Charlie feels terrible about it. He'll apologize. Cover her medical bills. Whatever makes this go away quietly." Pierce rubbed his temple where a headache was building. "That's not how assault charges work. It's exactly how they work when everyone's reasonable." Marcus's tone hardened slightly, the velvet glove slipping to reveal the fist beneath. "Come on, Raymond. You know how this city operates. Girl probably provoked him, made a scene to get attention. You really want to ruin a young man's life over some waitress looking for a payday?" The casual cruelty of that sentence, "some waitress," made Pierce wonder when exactly he'd stopped pushing back against conversations like this. When had he become the kind of cop who took calls from criminals and pretended they were negotiations between reasonable men? "I'll look into it," Pierce said, which was what he always said when he meant he'd make the problem disappear. "Appreciate it. Oh, and Raymond, your daughter's apartment, the one downtown? That's a nice neighborhood. Safe. Would be a shame if anything changed that." The line went dead. Pierce sat very still, phone still pressed to his ear, listening to the dial tone and feeling the weight of compromise settle over him like a familiar coat. 28 years, 6 until retirement. A daughter who didn't know her father took money from the Fitzgeralds to make cases disappear. A pension that depended on not asking questions or making waves. He pulled up the assault report again and began typing. Upon further investigation, incident appears to be accidental. Victim declined to press charges. Case closed pending victim confirmation. His hands shook slightly as he typed. He told himself it was just coffee withdrawal. At 11 a.m., Joanna Sanders received a call from the police department asking her to come in for a follow-up interview. She sat in the detective's office, wearing a borrowed jacket over her bandaged chest, exhaustion hollowing out her face. Pierce looked at her and saw someone who'd already been broken multiple times. Someone who'd learned that reporting crimes was just another form of punishment. "Miss Sanders, I've reviewed your statement from last night." Pierce kept his voice professionally neutral, the tone he'd perfected over decades of delivering disappointments dressed as procedure. "I have some concerns about moving forward with charges." Joanna's expression didn't change. She'd heard variations of this speech before. "What kind of concerns?" "The video evidence is ambiguous. Mr. Floyd claims the coffee spilled accidentally during a heated conversation. Multiple witnesses confirm you were arguing before the incident occurred. We weren't arguing. He poured it on me deliberately, while laughing, while filming. That's your recollection, Pierce said carefully. But memories get confused in traumatic situations. What looks intentional in the moment might have been, I know what he did. Joanna's voice stayed level, despite the tremor in her hands. I know what he's always done. And I know you're going to tell me there's not enough evidence, or it's my word against his, or pressing charges would be complicated and stressful and maybe I should just let it go. Pierce had the grace to look uncomfortable. I'm trying to give you realistic expectations about what the system can provide. The system hasn't provided anything except reasons why men like Charlie get to keep hurting people. Miss Sanders, how much did he pay you? The question came out flat, exhausted rather than accusatory. Or was it his connections? Someone made a call, told you to make this disappear, and now you're here explaining why justice isn't actually possible. Pierce said nothing, which was confirmation enough. Joanna stood, wincing as the movement pulled at her burns. I withdrew my statement. Tell whoever needs to hear it that I withdrew my statement, that I don't want to press charges, that it was all a misunderstanding. That's what happens next anyway, right? Might as well save us both the pretense. You don't have to. Yes, I do. She was already walking toward the door. Because if I don't withdraw it voluntarily, you'll find a way to make it disappear anyway, except it'll take longer and hurt more. So let's just skip to the part where Charlie Floyd gets away with it and I learn again that reporting crimes is pointless. She left the office without waiting for a response. Pierce sat alone at his desk, staring at the assault report on his screen, cursor blinking in the notes section where he was supposed to type, "Victim voluntarily withdrew statement." His phone rang. Internal number. He answered mechanically. "Detective Pierce, this is Captain Morrison. I need you in my office. Now." Pierce stood, legs heavy, knowing somehow that the comfortable pattern of compromise had just been disrupted by something or someone with more power than the Fitzgeralds. He was right. Charlie Floyd woke Friday morning to discover his Instagram account had been suspended. Violation of community guidelines regarding violent content, the notification read. The video, his video, the one with 18,000 views and climbing, had been removed. Appeals denied. Account permanently banned. He stared at his phone screen, confusion slowly curdling into anger. What the hell? His Facebook account was next. Suspended at 8:47 a.m. while he was still in bed, scrambling to understand what was happening. Then Twitter. Then TikTok, where he'd cross-posted the video hoping for better reach. Every platform, synchronized, like someone had flipped a switch that erased his entire digital presence. Charlie called Derek, hands shaking with rage and something else he didn't want to name. Did you see? They deleted everything. All the accounts. They're censoring me. Bro, I've got bigger problems. Derek's voice was tight, stressed in a way Charlie had never heard before. My dad just got a call from the dealership. Someone's claiming I fraudulently leased that Mercedes I let you borrow. There's an investigation. They're saying I might face charges. That's insane. You paid for that car. The lease is in my name. But apparently, someone reported that you've been the primary driver for months without being on the insurance. They're calling it fraud. My dad is losing his mind. Charlie's stomach dropped. Who would report that? I don't know, but whoever did it knew exactly what to say to make it stick. I can't let you use the car anymore, man. I'm sorry, but I can't risk my dad's business. The call ended. Charlie sat on the edge of his bed, his mother's bed, in his mother's apartment that he'd been living in rent-free while promising to find his own place, and felt the first crack appear in the foundation of his constructed life. At 9:30 a.m., his bank called. Mr. Floyd, this is Amanda from Coastal Credit Union Fraud Department. We've detected suspicious activity on your account and need to verify some transactions. What kind of suspicious activity? Multiple large transfers over the past 6 months that don't match your typical spending patterns. We're required to investigate potential money laundering. Your account has been temporarily frozen pending review. You can't freeze my account. I have bills to pay. This is standard procedure for investigations of this nature. You'll receive documentation by mail outlining next steps. In the meantime, all cards linked to this account have been deactivated. Charlie tried to buy coffee an hour later. Card declined. Tried his backup card. Also declined. Checked his bank app to find every account he had access to, including the joint account with his mother frozen with red warning indicators. By noon, his phone started buzzing with messages from people he barely remembered. Saw what you did to that girl. You're disgusting. This, you? Link to video compilation. Hope someone does this to your mother. Someone had compiled every video of Charlie's cruelty, not just the coffee incident, but clips from years of social media posts showing him mocking service workers, harassing women, bragging about manipulation. The compilation had been professionally edited, adding context from victim testimonies, court records, police reports that had supposedly been sealed. It was spreading across platforms he hadn't even known existed, shared by accounts with millions of followers, amplified by influencers who built audiences on exposing abusers. Charlie watched his name become synonymous with everything people hated about entitled men who weaponized power against vulnerable women. At 2 p.m., his mother called. "Charlie, what the hell did you do?" Her voice carried decades of disappointment compressed into a single sentence. "I just got a call from my bank. They're investigating me for harboring someone under criminal investigation." "Me, do you understand what that means for my credit? For my business?" "Mom, I don't know what's happening. Someone's attacking me." "You poured coffee on a woman and filmed it." "I watched the video, Charlie." Everyone watched the video. "You stood there laughing while she screamed in pain." "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" "Explain it to me. Explain how that video shows anything except you being exactly who I've been afraid you were becoming." Silence stretched between them, filled with years of excuses and enabled cruelty that had finally reached its natural conclusion. "You have 1 week to find somewhere else to live," she said quietly. "I'm done." The line went dead. Charlie sat in the apartment that was no longer his, scrolling through messages that kept arriving like incoming fire, watching his social currency evaporate in real time. Friends stopped responding. Connections went dark. The Fitzgerald crew, his supposed backup, his safety net, hadn't returned any of his increasingly desperate calls. At 4:30 p.m., his cousin, the one whose Rolex Charlie had been wearing, showed up at the apartment. "I need the watch back." Charlie had known this was coming, but the reality still hit like a physical blow. "I don't have it here. It's at the jeweler, getting cleaned." "Bullshit." His cousin's face was hard, angry in a way family usually reserved for strangers. "You pawned it, didn't you? Just like you pawn everything anyone's stupid enough to loan you." "I didn't. The Fitzgeralds called me. Said you've been using my name, telling people we're in business together. Said things are about to get complicated, and anyone associated with you should distance themselves immediately." He stepped closer, voice dropping to something dangerous. "What did you do, Charlie? What did you do that has actual criminals telling people to stay away from you?" Charlie had no answer because he genuinely didn't know. The assault had been Tuesday night. This was Friday afternoon. 72 hours, and his entire constructed reality had collapsed so completely, it felt coordinated, surgical, like someone with resources and patience had been waiting for the right moment to push. "The watch," his cousin repeated. "Today." After he left, Charlie stood in the center of the apartment and took inventory of what remained. No money, no car, no accounts, no friends, no family support, no social media presence, no reputation except the one now being broadcast across the internet as a cautionary tale. Everything he'd built, every connection, every borrowed resource, every woman he'd convinced to fund his lifestyle had been systematically dismantled in less than 3 days. His phone buzzed one more time. Unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Charlie Floyd?" The voice was calm, professional, unfamiliar. "Who is this?" "Someone who's been watching you. Someone who thinks you and I should have a conversation." "About what?" "About what happens next. About whether you understand yet that actions have consequences." "I don't know what you're—" "Yes, you do." The voice cut through his denial like a scalpel. "Meet me at Meridian tonight. 10 p.m. Come alone. Don't be late." The line went dead before Charlie could respond. He stood there with the phone pressed against his ear, finally understanding that whatever was happening wasn't random chaos or bad luck or temporary setback. Someone was doing this to him deliberately, and whoever they weren't finished yet. Charlie Floyd arrived at Meridian at 9:53 p.m., 7 minutes early, because fear had made him punctual for the first time in years. The bar looked different at night, or maybe Charlie was different, stripped of the confidence that had once made spaces like this feel like his personal territory. The neon signs that had seemed vibrant on Tuesday now felt garish, artificial. The well-dressed crowd that had once validated his presence now looked at him with recognition that made him want to disappear. Someone had shared the video compilation here. He could tell by the way conversation stopped when he entered, by the way the bartender's expression hardened with recognition and contempt. "I'm meeting someone," Charlie said, voice smaller than he intended. The bartender, same one from Tuesday night, the one who'd watched Charlie pour coffee on Joanna and done nothing, pointed toward the back without a word. Not toward the main seating area, but toward a door marked private that Charlie had never noticed before. He walked through the bar under the weight of dozens of eyes, each glance feeling like judgment he'd spent his entire life avoiding. The door opened before he could knock, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness, illuminated only by dim industrial lighting. Every instinct screamed at him to leave. But he'd spent 3 days watching his life disintegrate, and whoever had done this was the only person who could potentially undo it. So Charlie descended, each step taking him deeper into a space that felt deliberately designed to make people feel small. The room at the bottom was sparse concrete walls, a single table, 2 chairs, one overhead light creating a pool of illumination that left the corners in shadow, and sitting in one of the chairs, perfectly still, was a man Charlie had never seen before but somehow recognized anyway. Lucas Lemons didn't look like criminals were supposed to look in Charlie's imagination. No gold chains, no aggressive posturing, no performance of dominance. Just a man in a black suit, tattoos visible on his neck and hands, watching Charlie with the kind of patient attention that felt more threatening than any raised voice could be. "Sit down, Charlie." It wasn't a request. Charlie sat, and only then noticed the manila folder on the table between them. Lucas opened it with deliberate precision, spreading documents across the surface like a dealer laying out cards. Charlie recognized some of them immediately. Bank statements, text message screenshots, police reports he'd been told were sealed. Others were unfamiliar, but clearly about him, comprehensive enough to be terrifying. "Do you know who I am?" Lucas asked. Charlie shook his head, not trusting his voice. "I'm the man who owns the protection on this bar. The man who decides which businesses thrive and which ones close. The man who spent the past 3 days learning everything about you, not just the public Charlie Floyd, but the real one. The one who collects debts by terrorizing women. The one who's built an entire life on borrowed money and broken people." Lucas pushed a photograph across the table. Joanna Sanders in a hospital gown, burns visible on her chest, face hollow with exhaustion and shame. "Joanna Sanders worked under my protection," Lucas continued, voice never rising above conversational level, which somehow made it more frightening. "That means when someone hurts her, they hurt what's mine. When someone violates the safety I provide, they're not just committing assault, they're challenging my authority." Charlie's mouth was dry. "I didn't know." "You didn't know she mattered?" Lucas leaned forward slightly, and Charlie instinctively pressed back in his chair. "You didn't know that pouring scalding coffee on someone while filming their agony might have consequences? Or you didn't know that eventually, someone would care enough to hold you accountable? It was a mistake. I was drunk. I'll apologize. Pay her medical bills, whatever. You think this is about money?" Lucas's laugh was soft, joyless. "Charlie, you don't have money. You have debt structured like a house of cards, borrowed credibility from people who are realizing you've been using them, and a reputation that's currently being dismantled across every platform that matters." He pushed more documents across the table. Financial records showing the full extent of Charlie's debts, not $3,000, but $47,000 across multiple sources. Some to people whose names made Charlie's blood run cold. "The Fitzgeralds have been running interference for you," Lucas said, "making police reports disappear, pressuring victims to stay quiet, enabling your behavior because you were useful for their debt collection operations. But the Fitzgeralds work in my territory, which means they work with my permission. And I've just revoked that permission." Charlie felt the room tilt. "What does that mean?" "It means they're cutting you loose. It means every debt you thought they'd help you manage is now your problem alone. It means the women you terrorized on their behalf are being contacted by lawyers who specialize in holding abusers accountable. It means the police who buried evidence are being investigated by departments that don't take kindly to corruption." Lucas spread more photographs. Women Charlie recognized, victims he'd convinced himself were just business, just doing what needed to be done to collect money. Each photo showed burns, bruises, evidence of cruelty Charlie had rationalized as necessary. "You didn't hurt Joanna because you were angry," Lucas said, and his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "You hurt her because you thought you could. Because you've spent your entire adult life learning that cruelty works, that violence gets results. that powerful men don't face consequences. Someone failed to teach you differently. I'm correcting that educational oversight. Charlie's hands were shaking. What do you want from me? I want you to understand something fundamental about power. Lucas leaned back, and somehow the increased distance felt more threatening than proximity. Real power isn't about who you can hurt, it's about who you can protect. The Fitzgeralds forgot that. The police forgot that. And you never learned it in the first place. He pushed one final document across the table. Charlie recognized it immediately, a confession, already typed, listing every crime he'd committed, every woman he'd hurt, every debt he'd collected through intimidation and violence. You have 3 choices, Lucas said. First option, sign this confession. Testify against everyone you worked with, the Fitzgeralds, the police who took bribes, every business that enabled your behavior. Cooperate fully with prosecutors, accept whatever sentence comes, and hope that honesty earns you consideration. Charlie stared at the document like it was a snake. What's the second option? Disappear. Leave this city tonight. Abandon everything you've built here, which admittedly isn't much. Start over somewhere else with nothing except the knowledge that if you ever hurt another woman, if you ever use violence to collect debts, if you ever mistake cruelty for power again, I'll know. And next time, I won't offer choices. And the third option? Lucas's expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted. You resist. You refuse to cooperate. You believe somehow that you can fight back against this, that your connections will protect you, that you can wait this out and return to business as usual. What happens if I choose that? Then I stop being gentle. Lucas stood, buttoning his jacket with tattooed hands that looked capable of extreme violence despite their careful precision. I've spent 3 days dismantling your life without touching you. I've frozen your accounts, exposed your crimes, severed your connections, and turned your name into a cautionary tale, all without raising my voice or making a single threat. That's what gentle looks like in my world, Charlie. He walked toward the door, then paused. But if you choose resistance, if you mistake my restraint for weakness, I'll show you what justice looks like when it stops being patient. The Fitzgeralds know. The police who took their bribes know. And soon, you'll know too. Lucas left the room, footsteps echoing on the stairs. Charlie sat alone with 3 choices laid out before him, finally understanding that power, real power, had been watching him all along, memorizing his cruelty, waiting for the right moment to teach him what consequences felt like when they arrived, dressed in black suits, and spoke in quiet voices that carried more threat than any scream ever could. Charlie Floyd sat in that underground room for 17 minutes, before his hands stopped shaking enough to pick up the confession. The document was comprehensive, 4 pages of single-spaced text detailing crimes he'd committed, women he'd hurt, money he'd extracted through intimidation and manipulation. Each paragraph was corroborated with dates, names, amounts. Someone had spent significant time and resources building a case that would destroy not just Charlie, but everyone connected to his operations. The Fitzgeralds, corrupt police, complicit business owners, an entire network that had enabled his cruelty because it served their interests. Charlie's phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. You have until midnight to decide. After that, I decide for you. He checked the time. 10:47 p.m. 73 minutes to choose between prison, exile, or something worse that Lucas Lemons had been deliberately vague about. His first instinct was to run, grab what little remained of his possessions, and disappear before midnight. But where would he go? His bank accounts were frozen, his car was gone, his mother had evicted him. He had $47,000 in debt to people who wouldn't forget just because he changed cities. His second instinct was to call the police report Lucas Lemons for extortion, for threats, for whatever crime this situation qualified as. But Charlie had spent enough time adjacent to the Fitzgeralds to understand how organized crime actually worked. Men like Lucas didn't make explicit threats. They created situations where your only rational choice was cooperation, and calling the police would just accelerate whatever Lucas had been politely warning him about. That left the confession. Charlie read it again, this time really absorbing what signing would mean. Testifying against the Fitzgeralds meant becoming a target for everyone they'd ever done business with. Admitting to assault, extortion, financial crimes meant years in prison, real prison. Not the suspended sentences and probation he'd managed to avoid before, but it also meant something else. Accountability. The word felt foreign in Charlie's mind, like a language he'd never learned to speak. He'd spent his entire adult life avoiding accountability, restructuring reality so that nothing was ever his fault. Joanna had provoked him. Those other women had led him on. The debts he collected were just business. Every cruelty had an explanation. Every violation had a justification. Sitting alone in that concrete room with 70 minutes until midnight, Charlie couldn't find any more explanations that worked. He thought about Joanna Sanders, not the version he'd constructed in his mind where she was just an ex-girlfriend who needed to be reminded of her place, but the real woman whose life he'd systematically destroyed. The woman he'd isolated, controlled, financially manipulated, and finally assaulted in the most public way possible because she dared to rebuild herself without his permission. He thought about the other women whose faces had stared at him from those photographs Lucas had spread across the table. Women whose names he barely remembered, but whose pain he'd cataloged in debt collection spreadsheets. For the first time in his life, Charlie Floyd felt something approaching shame. His phone buzzed again. Different number. Text from Derek. Don't ever contact me again. My father's firm is representing the women you hurt. If you come near me or my family, I'll testify against you myself. Then Kyle. The Fitzgeralds say you're done. They say anyone who helps you is done too. Lose my number. Then his cousin. Mom told me what you've been doing, using our family name, pretending you had backing you never had. I hope they lock you up. Charlie watched his last connections sever in real time. Each message another bridge burning, another escape route closing. Lucas Lemons hadn't just dismantled his life. He'd done it so thoroughly that resistance wasn't even possible anymore. At 11:34 p.m., footsteps echoed on the stairs. Lucas Lemons returned, carrying a pen and a bottle of water. He set both on the table without sitting down, and his expression suggested he already knew what Charlie would choose. 26 minutes, Lucas said. Have you decided? Charlie looked at the confession, then at Lucas, then at his phone showing messages from everyone who'd finally seen him clearly and chosen to walk away. If I sign this, Charlie said slowly, what happens to me? Prosecutors file charges based on your testimony. You'll likely serve time. How much depends on cooperation quality and judicial discretion. 3 to 7 years probably, maybe less with good behavior. And if I disappear? You disappear, Lucas said simply. But you live with knowing you chose cowardice over accountability. You carry that forever. And the third option? Lucas's expression didn't change. Don't choose the third option. Charlie picked up the pen. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold it steady. Why are you doing this? You don't know Joanna Sanders. Why do you care what happens to one waitress? Because systems only work when everyone follows the same rules. Lucas said, you thought you were exempt. You thought cruelty was consequence-free as long as you had the right connections. I'm teaching you differently. By destroying my life? By holding you accountable for what you destroyed first. Lucas gestured to the confession. Those women didn't ask to be your victims. Joanna Sanders didn't ask to be humiliated in front of dozens of people while you laughed and filmed. They got consequences they didn't earn. Now you're getting consequences you did. Charlie stared at the document, pen hovering above the signature line. Every instinct screamed at him to find another way out, to negotiate, to manipulate, to do what he'd always done and talk his way into a better position. But there was no better position. Lucas Lemons had structured this so carefully that every exit except confession and accountability had been systematically closed. I'm sorry, Charlie whispered, and was surprised to realize he meant it not the performative apology he'd deployed dozens of times to escape consequences, but actual recognition of harm caused. Tell that to a judge, Lucas said without sympathy. Tell it to the women you hurt. Tell it during testimony when you're explaining exactly how the Fitzgeralds enabled your behavior and which police officers took money to make evidence disappear. Charlie signed the confession. His signature was barely legible, hand shaking so badly the ink smeared, but it was done. 4 pages of crimes admitted, networks exposed, accountability accepted. Lucas collected the documents and photographed each page with his phone before sliding them into a briefcase Charlie hadn't noticed before. What happens now? Charlie asked. Now you wait. Prosecutors will contact you within 48 hours with instructions. You'll cooperate fully, you'll testify honestly, and you'll accept whatever sentence comes without complaint. If you run, if you recant, if you warn anyone you've implicated, this confession goes public along with evidence that makes you look significantly worse than you already do. Lucas walked to the stairs, then paused. One more thing, Charlie. When you're in prison, and you will be in prison, Use that time to understand something. You weren't powerful. You were enabled. There's a difference. Real power protects people. What you had was just cruelty with a support system. That system is gone now. What remains is just you, facing consequences. He climbed the stairs and disappeared. Charlie sat alone in the underground room, confession signed, life dismantled, finally understanding that Lucas Lemons hadn't been his enemy. He'd been the correction Charlie had spent his entire life managing to avoid until he hurt the wrong woman in the wrong place in front of the wrong witness. Joanna Sanders returned to work on a Tuesday, exactly 9 days after Charlie Floyd had poured coffee on her chest and changed the trajectory of both their lives in ways neither had anticipated. The burns were healing second degree, the doctors had confirmed, painful but not permanent if she followed treatment protocols. The bandages were smaller now, hidden beneath her uniform. The physical pain had diminished to a manageable ache that only flared when she moved too quickly or forgot to apply the prescribed ointment. The emotional damage would take longer. She'd spent those 9 days in a liminal space between terror and exhaustion, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Waiting for Charlie to find her apartment, to show up at her door, to escalate the way he always escalated when someone dared to establish boundaries. She'd slept poorly, jumped at unexpected sounds, checked the locks compulsively, but Charlie hadn't come. Instead, something stranger had happened. The system that had always failed her had suddenly, inexplicably started working. The police had called on day 3 not Detective Pierce, but a different detective from Internal Affairs, who'd asked careful questions about Pierce's handling of her case and the Fitzgeralds' influence over local law enforcement. The conversation had felt surreal, like speaking a language she'd tried to learn before but never achieved fluency in. "We're investigating corruption and how assault cases are processed," the detective had explained. "Your case was flagged as part of a larger pattern. We'd like you to provide testimony about Detective Pierce's conduct." Joanna had testified, not because she believed it would matter. Hope was something she'd learned to ration carefully, but because refusing felt like another form of surrender. Then on day 5, a lawyer had contacted her. Pro bono representation from a firm that specialized in holding abusers accountable through civil litigation. They'd explained that Charlie Floyd was cooperating with prosecutors, that multiple women were coming forward, that there was momentum building toward actual consequences. "This isn't just about your case anymore," the lawyer had said gently. "It's about dismantling the network that enabled him. The Fitzgeralds, corrupt police, businesses that looked the other way. You don't have to participate if you're not ready, but if you want justice, we have a real path forward now." Joanna had agreed to participate, though she still didn't understand what had changed. Why was the system suddenly working after years of systematic failure? Who had applied enough pressure to crack open cases that had been sealed, to make prosecutors care about waitresses who'd been taught their pain didn't matter? Now, walking back into Meridian for her first shift since the assault, Joanna felt the weight of dozens of eyes tracking her movement through the bar. She recognized the expressions pity, curiosity, discomfort. Some of the staff looked away quickly, embarrassed by their own inaction on that night. Others offered small smiles that suggested solidarity they hadn't managed to express when it would have cost them something. Rita, the manager, intercepted her before she reached the staff room. "Joanna, my office, please." Joanna's stomach dropped. Here it comes, she thought, the termination disguised as concern. The suggestion that maybe she'd be more comfortable finding employment elsewhere, somewhere without traumatic associations. But Rita's office didn't contain termination papers. Instead, a man sat in the guest chair, late 40s, dressed in an expensive suit, expression unreadable in a way that suggested power held comfortably. "Joanna Sanders," Rita said carefully. "This is Mr. Lemons. He owns the building." Lucas Lemons stood, offering his hand. Joanna shook it automatically, noticing the tattoos that extended past his cuffs, the quiet authority in his posture. "Miss Sanders, I wanted to meet you personally." His voice was measured, professional. "I owe you an apology." Joanna blinked. "I'm sorry? This bar operates under my protection. That means everyone who works here should be safe from the kind of violence you experienced. I failed to ensure that safety. For that, I apologize." The words felt foreign, coming from someone in his position. Men with power in Joanna's experience didn't apologize to waitresses. They explained, justified, minimized. They didn't take responsibility for systemic failures. "I don't understand," Joanna said slowly. "What does your protection mean?" Lucas exchanged a glance with Rita before responding. I control security and operations for most nightlife establishments in this district. Business owners pay for protection services, ensuring their staff and patrons remain safe. Charlie Floyd violated that arrangement. I've taken steps to ensure he can't violate it again. What kind of steps? The kind that resulted in his arrest yesterday morning. Lucas's expression remained neutral, but something in his tone suggested satisfaction. He's being charged with assault, extortion, financial crimes. He's cooperating with prosecutors to expose the criminal network that enabled his behavior. Multiple women are pursuing civil litigation. The police officers who buried evidence are facing internal investigation. Joanna sat down without meaning to, legs suddenly unreliable. How? Systems fail when people with power choose not to maintain them. Lucas said simply. I chose to maintain this one. Charlie Floyd hurt you on my watch, in my territory. That made correcting the failure my responsibility. But why? The question came out sharper than Joanna intended. You don't know me. Why would someone like you care about someone like me? Lucas was quiet for a moment. And when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of lived experience. Because I understand what happens when powerful people decide certain victims don't matter. I've seen what that does to communities, to individuals, to the fabric of basic human dignity. And I've built my life around ensuring that in spaces I control, everyone matters equally. He pulled an envelope from his jacket. This contains compensation for medical expenses, lost wages, and pain and suffering. It's not contingent on anything, not silence, not testimony, not gratitude. It's simply what you're owed. Joanna opened the envelope with shaking hands. The check inside was for $25,000. I can't accept this, she whispered. You can and you will. Lucas's tone left no room for argument. Consider it partial payment for the failure of protection you should have received. The civil suits will likely result in more substantial compensation, but that will take time. This is immediate. Tears blurred Joanna's vision, not from pain this time, but from the overwhelming strangeness of someone powerful actually following through on promises that safety mattered, that her pain had value, that consequences could arrive for people who'd spent their entire lives avoiding them. What happens to Charlie? She asked. He'll serve time. 3 to 7 years, depending on his cooperation quality and judicial discretion. The Fitzgeralds are facing federal charges. Detective Pierce has been suspended, pending investigation. The system that enabled Charlie's behavior is being systematically dismantled. Lucas stood, preparing to leave. You don't owe me anything, Miss Sanders. Not gratitude, not silence, not loyalty. You deserved protection you didn't receive. I'm correcting that failure. What you do with your safety now is entirely your choice. He walked to the door, then paused. One more thing. If you choose to continue working here, you'll do so with the understanding that what happened to you will never happen again. Not in my establishments. Not to anyone. I can't fix everything that's broken in this city, but I can fix what's broken in spaces I control. Consider this one of those spaces. After he left, Joanna sat in Rita's office holding a check that represented more money than she'd made in the past year, trying to process the impossible reality that justice, actual justice, had arrived, not through official channels or public outrage, but through a quiet man in a black suit who decided systemic failures were unacceptable. Rita sat across from her, expression gentle. You don't have to work tonight if you're not ready. I'm ready, Joanna said, and realized she meant it. She stood, pocketing the check, straightening her uniform over bandages that would eventually heal into scars she'd carry as evidence that she'd survived something designed to break her. But she hadn't broken. Charlie Floyd had. The system that protected him had. The network of enablers and corrupt officials and people who'd profited from looking away, all of it had cracked open because one man had witnessed cruelty and decided consequences mattered more than convenience. Joanna walked back onto the floor, took her section, and began taking orders from customers who didn't know they were watching someone reclaim space that had been stolen from her. She moved through the bar with careful confidence, no longer trying to be invisible, no longer afraid that visibility meant vulnerability. Because this time finally someone powerful had watched her suffer and refused to look away, and that refusal had changed everything. Thanks for staying with this story right till the final moment. You're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to see your thoughts and connect with you down there.
все равно, как бы, ну, сути дела не меняет, как бы зарплата плюс-минус везде там, ну, больше, чуть меньше. Как бы, и, наверное, это все, вот эта общая ситуация, наверное, у многих привела, во-первых, сфера развлечений, да, всякие там кредиты и так далее, настолько загоняют каждого в задницу человека. И об этом на самом деле никто так-то не говорит. Какое количество сейчас, допустим, даже в те же сложные времена такие, когда вот сейчас идет там специальная военная операция, да, где люди вообще умирают, в принципе, за какую-то сумму денег. Ну, то есть, какая мотивация, то есть, у мужика идти, типа, на войну, воевать и, ну, как бы, заработать денег? Потому что он, вот, в обычной жизни не понимает, типа, как реализовать себя. Ну, он понимает, что он может пойти работать на какую-то работу, где зарплаты его все равно не будет хватать. Как бы, тут тоже двойственная сторона. Хорошо, когда она есть, плохо, когда ее нету. Да, вот это маленькая даже зарплаты. Но морально-то ты все равно подавлен. Ты понимаешь, да, я там пойду туда, но как бы смысла мне этого не принесет большого. Да, у меня там станет, если я вообще не работаю и буду работать за 50 тысяч, хорошо, что они у меня есть, я смогу там покушать себе купить, но это же дизмораль. Когда ты заходишь в интернет и видишь, как люди там в Дубае летают, покупают себе огромное количество автомобилей какие-то, ну, много всего такого, что ты за эту зарплату себе никогда в жизни позволить не сможешь. И как человеку оставаться морально, типа, сильным? Что ему нужно делать? Ну, наверное, во-первых, это, наверное, все от семьи исходит, да? То есть, какая семья у тебя, как она построена. Если ты один живешь, это сложно, да, ты будешь сам себя, но у тебя, опять-таки, возможно, ну, родители, если есть, которые, друзья, поддержат тебя в какой-то момент, хотя бы просто отвлекут тебя от этих мыслей. А если у тебя, к примеру, там, семья, жена, к примеру, да, есть дети, то тут, наверное, поддержка только от них исходит какая-то. Вот. Чтобы не упиваться в своих мыслях о том, что какая нынче сложная жизнь. И, наверное, других-то вариантов, в принципе-то, и нету. Какие вот еще варианты, в принципе, изменить, поменять свою жизнь настолько, чтобы она была, ну, казалась тебе удачной, да, реализованным себя в жизни, в чем-то. В чем, вот как проявляется на самом деле у нас реализованность? Наверное, у 90% случаев это финансовое благополучие, финансовая независимость. Это, наверное, одно из таких ключевых моментов, когда человек, наверное, считает себя реализованным, да, в этой жизни. То есть, как добиться этого? То есть, с учетом того, что даже возьмем нашу страну, да, сколько миллионов людей здесь живет, как каждому добиться этого результата? Непонятно. И с каждым годом просто ситуация становится все хуже и хуже. Все дорожает, люди зарабатывают либо столько же. Ну, даже если они зарабатывают столько же, на самом деле этого все уже недостаточно. К чему это все приведет на самом деле? В оконцове, наверное, мир погрязнет в большую депрессию в какую-то. Какие-то войны, возможно, или еще что-то еще больше глобальных таких вещей, которые не приведут ни к чему хорошему на самом деле. Поддержка каждого человека именно для того, чтобы он держался, наверное, морально, заключается в том, что, ну, наверное, дом, в который ты приходишь, должен быть крепостью твоей. да, что это единственное должно быть место, где ты будешь чувствовать себя под защитой. Для этого было придумано, наверное, своя пещера изначально, потом свои какие-то чумы, палатки различные, да, потом все это превратилось. На данный момент это у нас дома, квартиры, в которые мы приходим и должны ощущать себя в безопасности, чтобы можно быть немного морально расслабленным с учетом того, что ты выходишь каждый день на работу, на улицу, и все равно давление вот это вот, оно все равно присутствует. Когда ты заходишь в магазин, видишь цены эти, да, и так далее, не можешь себе что-то там приобрести, позволить на ежедневной основе, это откладывает большой, наверное, отпечаток. Не, наверное, а точно. И поэтому, когда возвращаясь домой, ты чувствуешь, вот хотя бы есть типа уголок того места, куда ты можешь прийти. Уголок на самом деле человеку много тоже не надо. Можно хотеть большего, но на самом деле человеку одному много не надо. Да? Ему нужно спальное место, спокойное место, где можно подумать. Ну, это когда ты один, к примеру, да? Когда у тебя есть семья, к примеру, ты приходишь домой, опять-таки, тут хотя бы, да, поговорить о каких-то вещах. Просто об отрешенных вещах, наверное. И, возможно, при этих же условиях у тебя и появляется какая-то дополнительная мотивация для реализации себя. А когда у тебя нету ничего, вот это уже становится проблемой. И это у многих на самом деле. Что значит не иметь ничего? Тут, наверное, самое главное, дизмораль у человека еще возникает при том, что это уже, наверное, где-то в глубине души даже она возникает при даже хорошей финансовой подушке такой, которая у тебя есть, хороших финансовых деньгах, да, то есть, но нету вот внутреннего ощущения, к примеру, дружбы, семьи, любви и так далее. Это уже отдельно на самом деле разговор, потому что мы, вот, к примеру, можем взять, как сейчас вот Мелстрой, если кто-то смотрит, насколько тяжело обладать такими финансами и не иметь, по сути, ничего. Ни друзей, ничего не иметь. Так главное, это получается для бедных главное деньги, для богатых главное какое-то внутреннее ощущение нужности, не из-за денег. Вот такое вот. И это борьба какая-то такая и вот эти два слоя общества, богатые и бедные, они друг друга не понимают. На самом деле из-за этого, возможно. Потому что богатый человек, он уже не смотрит на деньги, он не считает эти деньги. Ему важно внутреннее вот это вот ощущение того, что он нужен без них даже. Это как Тони Старку сказали: а кто ты без костюма? На вот это я филантроп, тудым-сюдым, он сказал, да? Так и человеку, у которого много денег, ты задашь вопрос: а кто ты без денег? Ну, что ты представляешь себе без денег? Вот и это, наверное, возможно, таких людей богатых, как вот, например, там Мелстрой, задав ему этот вопрос: а кто ты без денег? Он на него ответить-то и не сможет. Обратная сторона людей бедных, да, вот если мы посмотрим, человеку